I want to be in a sustainable place to serve you over this time.
I see that this adds a lot of value into creating who you are and experiences that facilitate you being more self-expressed.
I'm so grateful you allow me to serve you and be part of your life.
Penalties, and also we could take it to court.
Welcome to Domed Podcast. We are your hosts, Mistress Gemma
and Goddess Seraphyna.
Are you ready to be domed?
Hello, viewers. Well, you have spoken. And thank you for making season 1 of Domed Podcast such a success beyond what we could have ever imagined. And I'm not quite sure if you remember pups. How could you ever forget? And we heard what you guys want to hear more about. Specifically, you had a lot of questions about my dynamic with pups and specifics. And so we're here to indulge you, to go into the fun, maybe a little bit more explicit in a very sly way, into what our dynamic actually entails in more detail.
I'm really excited to explore with you too. And I think something that was so special about Pup's interview and something that we really wanted to gift is showing the true devotion and care and, dare I say, love that is a part of not every DS dynamic, but the special ones like you two share. So for the beginning of our mini-series, our listeners were very curious about financial domination and how it began and how it is structured. So, Pups, would you like to say a little hello?
First, I'd say thank you so much, Goddess, and thank you, Mistress Gemma, for having me back on the show. I'm thrilled to see the podcast is thriving, and I'm thrilled to share more about this beautiful dynamic that Mistress Gemma has cultivated. And I'm ready to dive in to my financial servitude.
Money. Dare I say, the biggest taboo, even if we don't even want to recognize that. So explicit, yet so obvious. Please share. How did we come upon financial domination and your financial servitude? It wasn't something that was an immediate kink or desire that we knew of going into when we first met.
I think the Pups has always been open to financial servitude because I think that it's the most genuine form of power exchange. But I think why it doesn't necessarily come up right at the beginning is that, for me at least, that's not a kink that can exist in a vacuum. It's something that has to come alongside a real person-to-person dynamic with a bit of depth. And I think that when we look at how it's evolved over time, that's kind of how it flowed because, just from a nuts and bolts perspective, I'd say that the first time we dipped our toes into this was relatively early. When kind of the second time I saw you, I would say that's the first time that Pups brought a real gift, to show his appreciation for the time that we were spending together and for, kind of what you're putting into our exchanges. And then relatively shortly thereafter that, I would say that we did have what I would characterize as kind of Pup's first tribute to you. We can talk about the semantics behind tribute if you desire, but that was the first time that Pups sent something which I guess we would characterize as kind of more traditional financial domination. From there, I would say that we kind of had a slow evolution for the next several months.
Are you speaking of the first time there was an explicit monetary tribute and financial domination? Was that also our first trip outside of Denver?
You were on a trip actually, and you were in, I want to say, Lisbon, and your bags hadn't arrived, and so Pups sent a tribute to help account for that, and hopefully that you were able to pick up some clothing to wear so you didn't have to wear a latex dress for the entire time.
when did it become very explicit where it was actually ingrained as a basically ritual into our dynamic? Because those tributes and offerings were kind of more one-off, or if I expressed that I would like your support or sponsorship in certain things, you were more than willing and eager in showing your devotion in that way. But there was a point where actually having a contract came about. And I find that was the true threshold into, okay, this is officially a financial relationship in this way that we're able to then express our dynamic in almost a more freeing way, wouldn't you say, than how it was previously?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that basically, there were two things that I think happened around that time, which was about 6 months into our dynamic. And the first was, I think that was the first time, it was around the first time that Pups, I would say, sent what was the first substantial tribute. When I say that, that's something that's unprompted. It's just something that Pups wanted to share with you to enrich your life. And then I think we also both kind of simultaneously came to the conclusion that you just alluded to, that if we set up some sort of framework, that it would give you the space to pursue the type of female-led relationship that you wanted to explore. And I think at the same time, Pups had decided that he was ready to devote his life to serving you. And, what we did at that point, having both kind of independently arrived at that conclusion, or you may have nudged me in that direction, was essentially we had a conversation like adults. And, as you said, there's a lot of weirdness around how people approach and talk about money. And so I think it does take some strength as well as some vulnerability to just really open up to somebody about the possibilities, about where we stand, and what Pups could offer, and what we could develop into a ritual framework, as you refer to it. And that's what we did. We went through these possibilities. We developed a contract at that point that has since evolved into an actually legally binding contract, which is very hot, by the way.
This happened less than a month ago.
Yes, it's the hottest legal contract that I've come across as of yet. When I think about how that has evolved over time, I'm really proud of myself for the discipline and the devotion to you that I've shown that we've pursued this over a period of years.
Yeah, it's definitely been a continuous expansion. Even the numbers continue to expand as our dynamic has grown, but also there's been growth on both of our ends. For you individually, as you operate out in the vanilla world, and within our dynamics, where your wealth has continued to grow. And I would like to say I'm a good motivator for him to work harder, but in a fulfilled way. Like, it is fulfilling. It's not grinding you to the point of, this is your only use and benefit to me, but it really does create that container where I know with your care in offering your hard work, again, power equals energy over time, and his energy and time spent in the vanilla world and working, producing money and contributing to my future well-being and wealth, for me, stands as one of the truest commitments to allowing us to then freely experience our dynamic without the constraints of, I don't want to get too much into this, but like almost a transactional nature, a tit for tat. It kind of allows us to kind of push the boundaries in ways where we both know that one isn't necessarily lacking the other because of your fulfillment in it, and then my knowing that I am cared for and whatever energy I put in we're also reaping the benefits entirely.
I actually don't have much to add to that, because I think that, the first thing I would say is I'm so grateful that you allow me to serve you and be part of your life in that way, because pups, I really do want to enrich your life and add value and never be a drag. And I think that what one of the things this has kind of forced pups to do is I absolutely do work harder and have experienced more success because I want to be in a sustainable place to serve you over this time. And I think that mutual growth has been very fulfilling on my side as well.
So sweet. I love kind of hearing how it evolved. And I think that something that is really beautiful, not necessary, but I think to create a structure and a foundation that is solid and sustainable for long-term devotion is being very mindful that it doesn't happen overnight, that there is, to be able to give up the type of power that money has in the world, trust needs to be associated with it. And kind of like you were mentioning, Gemma, of the symbiotic, beautiful nature of it, that when you usually think of bringing in money and finances into the conversation, people immediately get guarded that is transactional. And what's really beautiful about witnessing your relationship and dynamic in the DS, and then also what I've been exploring with my clients as well, that when the devoted generosity is gifted, we don't have to, we can get a little bit more creative with business model and structure of what that client and service relationship is, where I don't have to tally up the amount of hours or the access that they have to me and then put a monetary value, that if it is structured in a way that I feel taken care of and supported and served, that we just get to bask in the dynamic itself versus, how much does this texting exchange cost, which is, in my eyes, quite silly, which leads me to, I know that our audience is also curious, how do you structure the Gemma? How did you, lead this, kind of at that 6-month mark where that was that shift? How did you approach it? What was the structure? And then also what I'm curious about, what is the structure that was first created? What were the lessons that you learned, and how did that structure evolve into this new legally binding contract? Yeah,
it was definitely a progression of what felt right, and we were always on the same page. It wasn't necessarily, I absolutely expressed my desire, like I believe cash is queen. I love what I do, but I more so love my dynamics where the time that is invested into that dynamic isn't, again, tied to paying points. And if I could do this and money weren't a thing, I would do it for free. But the reality is, life exists, bills exist. I still need to live. And so, again, the allowance of this container then not dictating our day-to-day or specifics is how the dynamic is expanded. And this is also just my personal need as a dom and what gets me off. Like, I did not know that money was such a kink for me.
Oh my God, I love it.
And I actually, my relationship to money was pretty guarded before that in actually receiving it. And Where it started was when we decided to officially structure a contract, our first iteration, which was not legally binding, but kind of a fun play contract.
Also hot, but not quite as hot as the legally binding one.
Yes, the one where there's actually penalties, and also we could take it to court if needed, if arbitration is necessary. But I don't foresee that at all. I want it to be sustainable. For me, with my subs, it's like if I enter into this, it's because I see a spot for you in my life where, again, we're growing together. I am never going to enter a dynamic where I feel like there's not some symbiotic reciprocation in a way. Yes, maybe there's times where it feels like my sub is sacrificing a lot more, but in the long run, I have a concept and structure that I'm getting them moved towards, and they may not see that, but that's also their trust in my integrity and my care for them. And so it started with him needing to give me an outline of his total assets, where those are placed, what his cost of living is monthly, the basics, the essentials, understanding where he finds joy in life outside of our dynamic and outside of my presence. What money is expendable money? Where does that go? What his saving structure is. Like, what are his plans for his future? How much does he save? What percentage? I kind of run through that. If I see somewhere in the more expendables where I'm like, all right, I see that this adds a lot of value into creating who you are and experiences that facilitate you being more self-expressed. I'm going to always maintain that it goes there. Ultimately, I could pull those expendable money towards myself whatsoever, but I never want to limit my sub in their experience. And then structuring a monthly allowance, basically, for their living. And also making sure a certain amount. One thing you expressed was that you weren't putting as much into your retirement investments as you would like. And so then I diverted a certain amount monthly that he had to put towards that. And of course, a basis monthly tribute to me. And anything that was excess would be split 50-50. Ooh. However, that goes to like your bonus. Getting 50% of that quarterly. However, it has naturally just expanded to more and more of his income coming towards me. And that's not by way of me demanding that. It's actually come in a very natural where he wants to offer and he deeply desires. It gives him a sense of deep knowing, being seen, and fulfillment that I was not even able to predict. I mean, I have a credit card as well, but I'm also very mindful in what those purchases are. If it's anything that is beyond what we've already agreed on, like Ubers or like, these small purchases, I always do check in more of like, hey, this is where I desire the money to go towards. And generally, that's always towards something that is fostering my future well-being, whether that's health related, whether that's helping with sponsoring. And so I really see it as the money isn't for the immediate gratification, even though there's a lot of fun and where he likes to surprise me with gifts in these really fun, cute, thoughtful ways, which I really appreciate, truly and dearly.
I'm glad you do, Mistress. Thank you.
It really comes to what investments for both of us in the long run because of that sustainability. Because I've known, and it has continued to be proven that that pool has grown, even in the short 3 years that we've known each other.
That's really gratifying to hear from your perspective. Because Pups really does dream about literal dreams about doing more for you, and I hope that it's something that can continue to grow over time. And what it really speaks to is this is not, I can say from the sub's perspective, this is not just kind of empty sentiments. Mistress Gemma really is a benevolent deity and a reasonable person, and that is something that I've always appreciated in terms of the guidance and the leadership that she is providing, and it has been kind of mutually beneficial. She's exactly right. I'm now saving more for my retirement than I was before we entered into this structure, and I think this is something that does make it sustainable over time. And just to fill in a few of the blanks, because I think some of our listeners are probably curious about what that looks like. Is from a structure perspective, as Mr. Gemma was saying, there's a monthly tribute that I provide. I also provide half of my quarterly bonus. As Mr. Gemma has said, that has grown over time, which is great to see. She is able to charge things directly to me. And then there's kind of the category of what we were terming gifts, where that can run this huge gamut of things. But I think we both find, the forward-looking things that set Mistress Gemma up for success in experiencing her goals as the most meaningful element of that.
I have questions when setting it up, as you said, that Gemma gets her monthly tribute, and then for the one, I think that pups, if you could describe or explain the definition of what tribute is for you, I think that definition would be really helpful. And then also for the added credit cards and for the added gifts and all of that, is that budgeted from pups your monthly budget, or does that come from the tribute pool for Gemma?
Sure. I mean, the second question is more straightforward, so I'll answer that first. I keep minute track of this because I think it's fun for both of us. And so I have a spreadsheet where we're tracking all of this over time, and occasional updates with graphs and the like.
Love.
I need to send you your quarterly statement. But essentially, the overall amount per month on average ends up being multiples of the original tribute, the monthly tribute, and a significant multiple of that monthly tribute. I can't say that the exact progression of that is something that we've always spelled out explicitly. But what we have found is that, at least in my case and in the case of our dynamic, is that basically has a natural way of finding the bleeding edge of what is sustainable, in part because Pups is just very extra and enthusiastic, and also because Mistress Gemma set up this framework where I really do desperately want to please her and enrich her life. So I think that's kind of great. And
I'm going to interrupt you because there's a question within there that I have specifically for your excitement on giving and gifting. That I think what I love so much about your Findoming dynamic is that it is ethical. And my experience, having more under my belt, is that how do you contain your excitement and deep desire to gift and gift and gift and give and give and give, and also check in with yourself about knowing the dynamic sustainability and kind of that self-control of how do you decipher, okay, I get to indulge in my desire to gift Gemma in the immediate urge, and then how do you decipher that of, okay, it's a time to lean in and a time to implement self-control for our long-term sustainability?
Yeah, it's a great question. And essentially, I think that a lot of that comes down to the trust I have for Mistress Gemma, because I probably would push myself a little further than is strictly advisable on an ongoing basis if I was just left to my own devices. And so I think she helps meter that. Where I like to say that I have lots of ideas as to things pups can do for Mistress Gemma, and if she chose to do all of them at once, pups wouldn't be able to afford it. But I actually listen to her, and I listen to what she wants and her wishes, her desires, when she expresses what's important to her, and so we tend to focus on those. And I think that has been one of the kind of cornerstones as to how that's sustainable over time. And I think the trust runs both ways, where she trusts me to speak up if something is too much, and I think that is an important guardrail where it's very clear to me that if I'm not able to sustain something, that I should tell her, and even if that is a difficult conversation to have, that is something that I would mention. And then also, I'd finally say I'm willing to push myself, and I have restructured my life to serve Mistress Gemma. And I have, I'm 100% committed to that.
Thank you so much for that elaboration before you.
Well, the way I see it is that as he grows in the specific area financially, I expect that what's coming into me also grows in that appreciation of our dynamic and me guiding that. For that. And there's also times where travel is huge for you. That is something that drives you. That is your bread and butter outside of your devotion to me. Where recently I asked, do you have any trips that you want to go on or plan? And he was honest with me. He's like, yeah, I do. But, a lot of my tribute or a lot of those costs I've diverted to you. And I made it explicit. I was like, no, you're going to go on that trip and we will adjust it as needed. And so, again, there's that sustainability where both sides are considered.
I have a question specifically, and pups, what I really love in a quality of you is that there is honesty in your current placement, and there's not shame around being honest with yourself of where you're currently at. If just the sentence alone, if Gemma wanted all of the things at once, that you wouldn't be able to afford it. I think with people and subs that really enjoy findoming, there is a saying, I can't afford it. It hits a shame place that one, pups, do you usually communicate of, oh, that's stretching it? Or are you able to hear Gemma say, you can't afford this right now? And how do you receive that information if you do? And are there emotions that come up, or are you just okay with it and essentially advice for viewers?
Yeah, I'd say that doesn't actually come up altogether that much, because pups' natural inclination is to find a solution to make everything happen. And, with some ingenuity, with some rejigging of your life, you can cut out a lot of fat. I guess I should acknowledge that the scale of what we're doing is clearly not accessible to everyone, but conceptually, if you are willing to commit and to rejig your life, there's a lot of changes you can make to accomplish, everything that you are placing the highest priority on. And certainly it's my intention to always have, my service to Mistress Gemma as the highest priority. But as she said, if you're not feeding yourself as a whole, that can give rise to resentments or make it less sustainable over time. So I try to make sure that I'm being mindful of that as well. And so, I think it's a matter of kind of just to the extent that you can, prioritizing, and then, finding the most efficient framework to make something happen. And then certainly I'm willing to go a little further because I want to delight Mistress Gemma. And, I'm kind of prone to some extravagance, which I think, and my mask is slipping. And I think that, bearing that in mind, that you can accomplish quite a lot. And then the other thing I would say about this, and it speaks to kind of what I think is one of the misconceptions about quote unquote Findom, is that you want to frame it as service, and you want to frame it as adding value to your dom's life, rather than something that you're looking for, gratification, or simply something that you're trying to kind of to get your jollies off,
which is fine. You could play within that. Just set the structure.
I think you can play with that, and it's come to the point where I can't help but think it's hot whenever we engage in this, which is interesting to pups because it's not something that pups previously found arousing in a vacuum. It's very much about my servitude to you specifically, that makes this so hot. But I think what that what it really says is that or I guess what I would say is that it's a very rare person that it would be sustainable in the long run, where they're just chasing that dopamine hit. Possibly they exist, but I don't think that really accurately describes our dynamic.
Yeah. What I, in my dynamics, it's, the play, the scene. So hot, so thrilling, intense. Like it gets us 0 to wherever off the radar very quick, right? But what I found in my most fulfilling dynamics is that this, quote unquote, let's say, for lack of a better word, transaction of the financial domination, the reaping the benefits actually is a progression over time. It's not immediate tit for tat. The progression and fulfillment of, you've shared this before, the growth you've gone through personally, sides of yourselves that you've explored that you didn't have access to, your views, the way you move through the world has been a payoff over time. What I do when I dom, I am never short-sighted about the immediate. That's play. That's the sexy, fun time. But for a true contained lifestyle dynamic, I'm always thinking of the end vision of where I foresee my sub being. And that's where the investment in me that is so tangible in the financial domination, their fruits of their service, devotion, and sacrifice, they see over time.
Completely.
Would you agree with that? Have you experienced it?
I completely agree. First I would say I thank you for your thoughtfulness, and your care, and Pups is just so grateful that I get to be part of your life in this way, because I truly worship, respect, and adore you.
Oh.
When I see a sub that I want to invest in, I pretty clearly already see where in my life they're going to sit and what role they play.
So sweet. Thank you so much, you two, for explaining more. I know that we could talk about this for many more hours, but there are more topics that I need to pick your brains on. So we'll see you soon for the next mini-series. Did you enjoy being dommed? Like, subscribe, and add your worships in the comments. Follow us on all socials linked in the bio below.